The DC brand as an umbrella is one of the biggest superhero giants in the world, right alongside Marvel. Well, at least it used to be one of the giants in the superhero world, because it's no secret this brand has had a downfall over the years. The DCEU began in 2013, acting as their cinematic universe, and since its inception, it was a dumpster fire mess, to put it politely, with many problems like their creatives behind the franchise, projects promised that will never happen, as well as actors with controversy all around. Setup that just went absolutely nowhere, and just no real plan in place in general. Now, we have seen a huge decline in DC because of this, all due to the mess that has happened with DC over the years. Now, of course, not everything has been bad, such as the Batman and more recently the Penguin. Both have done very well. Now, since a new era of DC is about to begin with Creature Commandos in a few months and Superman next year to kick off the DCU, it got me thinking about what the DCEU did over the years. What happened to lead us to where we are now? Why has the DC brand basically become dead to the general public? Where did they go wrong? Why are Batman movies the only way this brand stays relevant? Why is this brand basically dead when it should be as relevant as Marvel is? Well, we are gonna find out how the DCEU rose and fell. Now, of course, I'm not gonna dunk on everything the DCEU did, because not everything was bad. Sometimes there are diamonds in the rough. So I'm basically going to tear this universe apart entirely. Now, I'm not going to talk about everything here, but I'm just going to get into how the DCU rose and then fell. Now, in order to start, we got to go back to the very beginning when Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy ended, starting with Man of Steel. There are parts here that I do really like, such as Henry Cavill, who here I think Henry did a really good job. I know some hate the idea of Clark not wanting to show his powers and how the world would react, but I think that's actually a very interesting concept. And I know I just said I am not a Snyder fan, but I will admit the visuals and cinematography he brought to this world was just fantastic. Like, that flight scene in the opening Krypton scene was just masterful. And Hans Zimmer cooked up a great score here. He already had a lot to compete with John Williams, yet he still cooked. But easily my favorite part of this film is Michael Shannon as General Zod. He still remains, in my opinion, the best DCEU villain to date. I think Michael Shannon did a great job in the role, but I think the reason why he is so great is because he's not really a bad guy. He just wants to save his race. He wants Krypton back no matter the cost. You may not sympathize with him, but you understand why he is doing what he is doing. However, the film does have a lot of problems as well, such as Lois Lane. Now look, I love Amy Adams, but in my opinion, she was a huge miscast. It felt like she was only cast because she was a big name. She and Cavill have no chemistry at all. And the character assassination of John Kent here, you are going to hear that a lot. This is not John Kent. Now, it might be interesting to see him a bit more scared of how people would react to Clark, but the execution just wasn't there at all. Not to mention, his death scene is, probably one of the dumbest deaths I've ever seen. And then we had the controversial Zod death scene. Not in a million years would Superman kill someone. I get that he felt bad for it, but still, he would have never killed a soul. But while this film isn't perfect, it does have its problems, it was still good enough to get people interested and for Warner Brothers to make this their cinematic universe. So let's talk about the next film in this franchise because, this is not good. It's pretty bad. Like, I liked Henry's Superman and Man of Steel, but here he is just not Superman. This is character assassination at its finest. All he does here is mope around, hate how people hate him. The whole point of Superman is that he is a beacon of hope. What makes Superman so interesting is his hope for humanity, his goodness. He enjoys helping people. Now, sure, it may not be realistic for him to be hopeful and inspiring in a cruel world. Sure, but if anything, that's what makes Superman special. But in BVS, he is the opposite, just a dark, mopey figure, and that is not Superman. This entire film is an insult to the Superman character as a whole, as well as Batman. It is no better here, just like Superman, character assassination. I hate how this Batman has like 20 years of experience. Like, you're starting a new universe and you start him out at that point. It does not work at all. I will say, I think Ben Affleck did a good job with what he was given, and that suit, oh my god. But my biggest problem with Batman here is the fact, yes, you guessed it, he kills. And I know Batman has killed in the movies, but here it felt like it went too far. The whole point of Batman is his no-kill rule. You take that away, he is not interesting at all. No matter how bad the criminal is, he will never take a life, because that takes away their power to change. And if he breaks that rule, he knows he will never be Batman again. He will never be able to stop killing people. And Snyder's Batman broke that rule. Not to mention, the whole nightmare section was just unnecessary. And this film has the worst Lex Luthor in any media. This doesn't even feel like Lex, it feels like the Riddler. Jesse Eisenberg, I think, could have made a great Lex, but he had terrible material to work with. And then we have the dumbest scene in the entire film, the Martha scene. The fact Batman and Superman stop fighting because Superman says Martha. That has to be one of the worst written scenes I have ever seen in a superhero movie. And the cherry on top of this, they introduced the entire Justice League. Like, these kind of things are something you should build towards so it can have an impact. I felt nothing during the death of Superman because it was his second appearance. And I know I'm not alone here. If this was towards the end of the DCEU, it would have had more impact. And then Warner Brothers panicked, leading us into the next film. Look, Suicide Squad, it's not like as bad as BVS, but it's still terrible. I remember seeing that first trailer and just rewatching it over and over again, thinking to myself this was gonna be a banger. But it wasn't. However, it isn't all bad. It did introduce us to some great characters, like Harley Quinn and Amanda Waller. Plus, it introduced me to Margot Robbie, which is a plus for me. And Viola Davis is just top tier casting. Like, you cannot do better than Viola as Amanda Waller. No one will ever do it better. I guess Will Smith was fun, but to me, it just felt like it was star power more than anything. And also, not to mention the villains like Enchantress and their boring villains. This movie felt like Warner Brothers was trying to get the tone of Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool, but failed miserably. So at this point, I was just out. But just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in with Wonder Woman. This was such a great film and reignite this universe. It felt like a war film mixed with a mythological epic. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Gal as Wonder Woman, and I do agree, but here I think she was really great. Her chemistry with Chris Pine was also pretty good. The action was great. Granted, it did have a pretty bad villain, and the final act just felt random, but overall, this is a really good film. But then we were back to regular programming with Justice League. This movie, as time has gone on, aged worse and worse, especially after finding out the behind-the-scenes issues. This film is just laughably bad, with god-awful CGI, with the most famous mustache gate. Not to mention, the tonal inconsistency here is just so bad. The humor here, all of it just falls flat. Some of it at times is just straight up gross. The DCEU started off very rough here, and DC as a whole still hasn't recovered from this. After Justice League, the DCEU basically course corrected in the worst way possible, and DC was in a rough state. However, it wasn't all bad. The first movie after Justice League was Aquaman. Now, this is where it becomes more complicated, because Aquaman was actually pretty good. Now, look, Aquaman isn't a perfect film by any means. It's not a masterpiece, absolutely not. But it was a fun time, and that third act was a banger. With his rivalry with Orm being a clear standout, it feels more like a mix of classic adventure movies such as Indiana Jones, The action, the suits, and Atlantis was just great. While it is not a perfect film, it is a relatively enjoyable one. Then we had Shazam, which was one of the highlights of the universe for me. Like Aquaman, it is not a perfect film, but it was a good film. I do think some of the humor is a little too childish for my liking, but I did like how they had YouTube humor. I think that was a really creative idea. The Christmas vibe was also really good and it works really well. And the villain, Dr. Savannah, was pretty good as well. But the core of this film is within the family. Billy Batson starts off as a kid just wanting to find his mother and his family. But by the film's climax, he realizes his family was right in front of him the whole time. His foster family. Then we had Wonder Woman 1984. I was so excited for this movie because of how much I loved the first Wonder Woman movie, but this was such a disappointment. This film really shows how bad Gal's acting is. They butchered Cheetah here and the CGI was just terrible. The writing is just so bad. My only positive for this movie is Pedro Pascal. That is it. He is the only reason to watch this movie. He was great as Maxwell Lord. But the plot device of the Dreamstone is just so stupid. The fact Steve comes back, but this time in another person's body just feels wrong. Just a terrible film altogether, and I will never watch this film again. But then we had The Suicide Squad, and it was fantastic. Basically, the movie WB wanted years ago, well, this is it. This is the movie. I was already excited because James Gunn was attached as the director, but I didn't think it was going to be this good. Basically a soft reboot of the Suicide Squad, and that was the best move ever. Like, with Rick Flag specifically, I did not care for him in the last movie. He was very one-dimensional, but then here I actually cared for him. He was great, and when he died, I was actually crying. And other returning characters like Margot Robbie and Viola Davis, I would argue their characters are even better here. This film having that R rating definitely helped a lot here, and it showed what a director can do when he is passionate about the characters. Then we had Peacemaker, which before it was released, I was pretty skeptical to say the least. As in the Suicide Squad, I just didn't really like the character. But then when the trailers came out, I became more interested. And then I watched the show and I fell in love. This is one of, if not the best DC TV shows ever. If anything, it taught me James Gunn is always right. This show is absolutely hilarious. But the core of the show is within the characters. I never thought I would care for characters like Harcourt or Economos, but I did. Vigilante is just the best. Sure, it's very different from the comics, but he is still just great and is an all-time favorite. Like, not to mention, that Justice League cameo was just awesome. I feel like Gunn regrets putting that in now, but it was still great. And if you ask me, DC had kind of a hot streak going. Ever since Justice League, I enjoyed majority of the DC projects. But then that streak ended with Black Adam. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this movie. It's just one of the most generic superhero movies I've ever seen. I honestly don't remember what happened. Like, Black Adam just feels like The Rock's ego project. The post-credit scene for Black Adam was cool, but it was all for nothing. Like, man, I feel so bad for Henry. He deserves so much better. We had the so-called greatest superhero movie of all time, The Flash. Like, when that marketing press was happening, that was so funny. But there was one issue before this film even started, and that was they were adapting. Look, I never liked their version of Barry Allen, and I know I'm not alone here. Even in both cuts of Justice League, I never liked this version of The Flash. Ezra's portrayal is just not The Flash. They run weird, doesn't act like Barry Allen at all. His suits suck in all of his appearance, and that doesn't even count the real world problems they caused. I don't think it's a hot take to say that Ezra was a huge miscast. If it isn't, well, I don't know what to say. Now, not only did we have one Barry Allen, but we had two. Ezra was even worse as young Barry Allen. It is so annoying to sit through. Like, How is this an idea in the first place? I don't get it. But my biggest problem with this film is it's nothing but nostalgia bait to get butts and seats to prey on the nostalgia of longtime fans. Michael Keaton in this film was just surface level at best. He serves like zero purpose here. Zod, also nothing here. Both make absolutely no sense. Keaton's Batman even has lines that just feel so forced just to get people to cheer in the movie theater. Both Keaton and Shannon felt like they were just there for the paycheck and nothing else. While I do think Sasha Calle did the best with what she could, she was mishandled in the writing. She was super one-dimensional with no real depth other than being cool, I guess. But that cameo scene is easily one of the worst scenes in a comic book movie, I think, ever, honestly. The cameos here only really focus on Superman for some reason. The entire film basically ignores everything about the Flash. Like, as a massive Flash fan, he's a top 3 superhero for me. The fact this film has no Flash villains is a crime. But the decision to bring back George Reeves and Christopher Reeve through CGI for nothing more than to get people to cheer just pisses me off. The CGI in general through the film is awful. Not to mention, some of the cameos here are just ones nobody asked for, like Helen Slater from one of the worst DC movies, like just why? And Nicolas Cage as Superman, just why? The general audience has no idea about this, so it just feels really unnecessary. Like, out of all the cameos considered, not Grant Gustin, but Nick Cage Superman was. However, this film isn't completely terrible. I've seen some people call it like the worst superhero movie ever made. Like, guys, this movie is bad, but it's not that bad. Guys, let's chill for a minute. When it focuses on Barry and his mom, it's pretty good. And the opening sequence was actually pretty cool, but that's about it. Overall, the DCEU may have had some good products here and there, but in the end, it was all for nothing. And that brings us to right now, the future of DC. Now, the future of DC is very bright, but it's also very concerning. Of course, we got Creature Commandos in December, starting this universe, and it actually looks pretty good. So I'm sure we'll be talking about Creature Commandos when it comes out. The whole soft reboot aspect of this universe definitely is very risky, but from the looks of it, right now at least, it only looks like it's characters from the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and Blue Beetle. And out of all of those, the only thing that connects them to the DCEU is that Justice League cameo, and that can easily be retconned. All you need is a good explanation, and they can all fit in, and it will be fine. Another risky idea is the thought of having 2 Batman going on at once. Personally, I've never seen this as a big issue like a lot of people. I know some people want Pattinson to be the DCU Batman, even though that would ruin everything Matt Reeves is doing, but whatever, it's not gonna happen anyway. I think it just depends on how both of these Batmen are marketed and how different they are. Like, market the Batman as its own Elseworld movie, and market The Brave and the Bold as a DCU movie, and there you go. They can coexist and casual audiences won't be confused. From the looks of it, DC is going from a different approach compared to Marvel. Instead of Marvel's more linear approach, instead they'll be taking notes from Star Wars. Yes, I know Star Wars sucks, but let me explain. For as much crap as we give Star Wars, the way they use their different timelines works so well. Even if you don't watch their animated content, you can easily get into it without doing homework. Now, of course, DC isn't Star Wars, so this will probably be a bit different. But from everything we heard, each project will stand on its own and be its own thing, which does excite me. And it could be cool to see different timelines, like maybe go to the 50s with the JSA, or the future with Batman Beyond. Like, can I get some Batman Beyond content, please? I need it! However, I do have some concerns. Although, when it comes to games, I'm not sure how I feel about that. From what Gunn has said, they won't feel like a necessity, but still, that's a big ask. Especially with how long video games take to make, it might not be the best idea. Also, not everyone plays games, just like how not everyone watches animation, shows, or even movies. However, if Gunn stays true to his word and every project stands on its own, then I think it could work, just depends on the execution. But by far my biggest concern, especially after the DCEU's failure, is Superman. I don't think a film has ever had more pressure than this one. Not only because of the failure of the DCU, but also because this is the first film in this franchise. I remember when people first started talking about this, and I saw people bringing up Avengers Infinity War and Endgame to compare the pressure. However, even if those films were bad or flopped, the MCU would still be intact because Marvel earned the trust of their fans and the audience. Sure, Marvel today is pretty hit and miss, but guess what? We are still here. People are still gonna be there for Fantastic Four, their Avengers movies, and anything else they have planned because they earned people's trust. But when it comes to DC, they have lost the trust of the audience. So the entire fate and future of DC rests on Superman's shoulders. When it comes to franchises, the first film needs to be as good and successful as possible in order to have legs. I mean, look at the MCU. Iron Man was great, and look where we are today. And now that the DCEU is out of the window and failing miserably, I'm worried for Superman, even though it's my most anticipated movie of next year. Even with Gunn directing, that's a big challenge for him. He is known for using lesser known characters. The biggest character he has used was Harley Quinn. So he needs to understand the assignment. So Gunn and crew need to knock this out of the park on every level. Nowadays, people don't show up in droves for movie theaters anymore unless it feels like an event, something they cannot miss. Superman is my favorite superhero. I adore that character, and I hope Gunn can be able to get rid of the whole Superman is boring mindset. However, if anyone can live up to this challenge at hand, it's James Gunn. He was offered Superman years ago, but turned it down because he didn't have the right story in mind, until the passing of his father and found the story he needed to tell, releasing the movie on his dad's birthday. Even pulling inspiration from All-Star Superman, a comic that Grant Morrison wrote to deal with the grief of losing his own father. He even said one of his favorite memories as a kid was seeing his father reading a comic. More importantly, a Superman comic. If that doesn't scream passion, I don't know what does. So if James Gunn is pulling from this place of pain and grief, I think he's gonna bring the same amount of passion into this movie as he has done with all of his other movies. The story details we have heard also sound great. It feels like this could be the Superman movie we have all waited for. Like, James Gunn hasn't missed yet, at least in my opinion. Like, sure, he isn't a perfect director by any means, but just like Kevin Feige, he is a die-hard comic book fan. If anyone is right to lead DC, it's him. Either way, it's gonna be a very interesting year for DC. It is really nice to see that we're getting a fresh start. Well, sort of. But it is truly up to Superman to save DC, and, you know, that is very fitting for the character. And either way, I'm there day one, and I'm rooting for it. And I hope that this film is like what the Batman was, but for Superman, and is the definitive Superman movie we have been waiting for. But to bring it all home, the DCEU was a complete and utter mess, with a lack of planning from Warner Brothers, throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, not using their heavy hitters properly, and rushing instead of building to it. Although it did have its moments, the DCEU is everything a cinematic universe shouldn't be. And if you are still here, just want to say thanks for tuning in, and make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. But until next time, take care.